The judge's gavel struck, sharp and final. Sentence is 2 years in state prison. The courtroom fell silent except for the faint shuffle of papers. Tiana looked up, her eyes steady, but her hands clenched tight in her lap. "Your Honor," she said quietly, voice firm despite the weight pressing down on her, "there's something you don't know." The judge's eyes narrowed, skeptical but curious. "Go on." Tiana took a slow breath, the room's tension folding into the space between words. "My father is Judge Robert Langston." A murmur rippled through the courtroom like a sudden wind. The judge's hand paused, then relaxed slightly. "Is that so?" His tone was neutral, but held an edge. "That doesn't change the facts." Tiana's gaze didn't waver. "No, but it changes who you're judging." The attorneys exchanged looks, the power balance shifting quietly but unmistakably. The judge leaned forward, voice softer now. "Are you suggesting I show leniency because of your father?" Tiana shook her head. "I'm saying I deserve a fair trial without prejudice clouding your judgment." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the world judged her already, not by her deeds but by the color of her skin and the assumptions wrapped around her name. Inside, she stood poised, calm, reclaiming her dignity through quiet strength. The judge's face tightened, a crack in his usual exterior. "Very well. I will review the case further." Tiana nodded once, a small victory won not through anger or defiance, but through the steady power of truth spoken without shouting. The room shifted, respect replaced. Contempt, if only the judge leaned back, the weight of Tiana's words hanging heavily in the air. His fingers drummed on the bench, eyes narrowing with a mix of frustration and contemplation. "You expect me to believe that your father's identity should influence this court's decision?" His voice was low but firm, commanding the room's attention. Tiana met his gaze without flinching. "No, Your Honor, I expect fairness. My case should be judged on facts, not on assumptions about who I am or where I come from." Her words were steady, each one measured like a carefully placed stone. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for justice." The silence stretched. The spectators shifted in their seats, sensing the subtle shift in power. An unspoken challenge to the judge's authority. The prosecutor cleared his throat, but said nothing. Even the bailiff seemed to pause, the rigid formality loosening for a fleeting moment. The judge exhaled slowly, his posture relaxing just enough to reveal vulnerability. "Justice, yes, but the law must be blind to all outside influences." He studied Tiana's calm demeanor, the quiet strength in her eyes. "Still, I admit this revelation complicates matters." Tiana's voice softened, not pleading, but resolute. "It complicates only because of the prejudice that lurks beneath, because of the assumptions about me before anyone heard my side." A brief pause. The judge's expression softened, a flicker of regret passing through his eyes. "Perhaps I have allowed my biases to interfere. That is not the role I'm sworn to uphold. No applause, no dramatic proclamations, just a quiet acknowledgement of a fault faced." Tiana nodded, her heart steady, her spirit unbroken. "Thank you, Your Honor." The courtroom seemed to exhale, the scales of power balancing, if only slightly, as dignity reclaimed its place for a moment. The judge sat back in his chair, the weight of the courtroom's silence pressing down like a tangible force. His eyes, sharp and calculating, fixed on Tiana with a mixture of disbelief and unease. "You expect me to believe that your father's identity should influence this court's decision?" His voice was steady, carrying the authority of the law but also an edge of personal skepticism. Tiana met his gaze without wavering. "No, Your Honor. I expect fairness. My case should be judged on facts, not on who my father is or assumptions tied to my skin color." Her voice was calm, but resolute, each word deliberate. I am not asking for special treatment, I am asking for justice. The room shifted slightly. The murmurs quieted as those present sensed the fragile tension crackling between the judge and the young woman standing before him. The prosecutor cleared his throat, but said nothing. Even the bailiff's usual rigid stance softened for a brief moment. The judge exhaled slowly, fingers tapping the bench with a thoughtful rhythm. Justice demands impartiality. The law must be blind to outside influence. His gaze sharpened. Again. Yet, your revelation complicates the matter inevitably. Tiana's voice softened, not pleading but unyielding. It only complicates because prejudice colors the view before facts are considered. I'm judged not by my actions, but by assumptions about who I am. A heavy pause stretched, thick with unspoken truths. The judge's face tightened, then softened, as if wrestling with a conflict beneath the surface. Perhaps I have allowed a bias to cloud my judgment. That is a failure of the oath I swore. No fanfare followed, no dramatic shift, just the quiet acknowledgement of a flaw confronted. Tiana nodded, feeling the subtle shift beneath the courtroom's rigid decorum. Thank you, Your Honor. The atmosphere changed. The weight of power balanced anew, dignity and restraint reclaiming ground. Yet beneath the surface, the battle for true justice was far from over. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled, eyes locking onto Tiana with a mix of challenge and curiosity. You speak with confidence, young lady, yet confidence alone does not alter facts or law. His voice was steady, commanding. Tiana swallowed, steadying herself. No, Your Honor, but truth demands we look beyond assumptions. I'm not here to escape justice, but to ensure it is served fairly. A faint murmur passed through the courtroom. The prosecutor shifted uneasily, but remained silent. The judge's gaze flicked briefly to the gallery, where whispered conversations began to swell. You asked me to set aside prejudice, the judge said, voice quieter now. A worthy request. But the court sees what it sees, evidence, testimony, not pedigrees or family names. Tiana's eyes burned with quiet fire, and yet those pedigrees shape what the court believes before evidence is heard. My father's name should not shield me, but neither should my skin color condemn me. The judge's jaw clenched. This court cannot be swayed by social narratives, only law. Then let the law be truly blind, Tiana whispered, voice breaking just slightly, not just to faces and names, but to the biases that hide in plain sight. A long silence settled, heavy and electric. The judge exhaled slowly, voice softening. You remind me of a truth we often forget. Justice requires courage, not just from those who seek it, but from those who wield it. Tiana's lips pressed into a firm line. I am ready to face that courage. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The balance of power, once rigid and unyielding, shifted imperceptibly towards something new, a fragile hope for fairness. The judge's eyes narrowed, searching Tiana's face for any sign of hesitation, doubt, or weakness. Your argument rests on ideals, he said, voice firm but not unkind. But the court operates on law, evidence and precedent, not ideals. Tiana nodded slowly. I understand, Your Honor, but ideals shape law. Without acknowledging the biases beneath, evidence can be twisted, precedent misapplied. My case is not just about facts. It's about the lens through which those facts are seen. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor's face tightened, but he said nothing, sensing the shifting atmosphere. The judge leaned back, folding his hands. And what would you have me do? Tiana took a breath. Examine my case with the awareness of those biases. Judge me on what I have done, not on assumptions about who I am or where I come from. The judge's gaze held hers for a long moment, tension thick in the air. Then slowly he said, Very well. I will order a review of the evidence with an open mind. Relief washed over Tiana, tempered by the knowledge that the battle was far from won. But this was a crack in the fortress. As the courtroom began to stir, voices rising again, Tiana felt something deep within settle, a quiet strength born not of victory, but of standing her ground. The judge's voice cut through the noise once more. Court adjourned. Tiana rose, steady and composed, and met the eyes of those watching. For once she was not the accused defined by prejudice, but a person demanding to be seen, heard, and judged fairly. The fight for justice was ongoing, but for now, her dignity was intact. And that was a beginning. The courtroom emptied slowly, the tension lingering like a heavy fog. Tiana gathered her belongings, feeling the eyes of strangers weighing on her back. She heard whispers, some curious, some skeptical, but she kept her head high, her steps measured. Outside, the bright light of day contrasted sharply with the shadows inside, and she inhaled deeply, tasting the air of fleeting freedom. Malik approached quietly, his presence steady like a shield. "You did what you had to," he said softly. "You stood tall." Tiana met his gaze, a small, weary smile breaking through. "It wasn't easy, but silence would have been worse." He nodded. "This changes things. Slowly, but it does." They walked together down the courthouse steps, the noise of the city washing over them, car horns, distant voices, the relentless pulse of life continuing despite the battles waged inside. Walls like these. "I'm scared," Tiana admitted, voice low but honest. "Not just of what comes next, but of being forgotten." Malik stopped, turning to her. "You won't be. You're making sure no one can look away." A pause, filled with unspoken promises. "Justice isn't loud," Tiana said quietly. "Sometimes it's the quiet strength, the calm that refuses to break." Malik smiled, "And that strength is contagious." Together, they stepped forward into the light, uncertain, determined, and unbroken. The days that followed were a slow unraveling of truths. In whispered corridors and hushed conversations, Tiana's name carried a new weight, not the burden of accusation, but the quiet echo of courage. Her presence alone unsettled old prejudices, forcing those who once looked away to reconsider the stories they told themselves. She sat in a small cafe one afternoon, the hum of life around her fading as Malik slid into the seat opposite. "They're talking," he said, a trace of awe in his voice, "about fairness, about seeing you, not just your record." Tiana stirred her coffee, eyes distant but focused. "It's a start, but it's not the end," Malik nodded. "You changed something, not just for you, for all of us." The weight of those words settled on her like both armor and burden. Justice, she knew, was a path riddled with shadows, but every step forward was a light. Later that week, the judge called for a review, acknowledging the need to peel back layers of bias. Tiana faced the process with a quiet dignity, each hearing a test of resilience. The courtroom no longer felt like a cage, but a battleground where her truth fought to be seen. Through it all, she spoke without raising her voice, steady, unwavering, powerful in its simplicity. She refused to be silenced or diminished, and slowly, very slowly, the walls began to shift. The courtroom was colder than usual that day, the sterile walls echoing with the faint rustle of papers and quiet footsteps. Tiana sat with her lawyer, her hands folded calmly on her lap, though inside a storm brewed. The weight of every judgment, every whispered assumption pressed down on her. Yet she remained still, a fortress of quiet dignity. The judge entered, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Tiana. "After thorough review, this court acknowledges the possibility that bias influenced earlier proceedings," he began, voice measured. "We will reassess all evidence with strict adherence to impartiality." A ripple of murmurs passed through the courtroom, a mixture of surprise and cautious optimism. Tiana's lawyer nodded, offering a subtle smile of encouragement. Tiana met the judge's eyes, her own steady and resolute. No words were needed. The unspoken understanding between them was clear. As the session concluded, she stood and faced the crowd. No anger, no demands, just a calm strength that spoke louder than any plea. Outside, Malik waited. He saw her approach and smiled warmly. "You did it." She shook her head gently. "We did it, but the work continues." Malik's smile softened. One step at a time. They walked together into the afternoon light, the future uncertain but no longer daunting. For Tiana, justice was not a destination, but a journey, one marked by resilience, quiet courage, and the unyielding refusal to be invisible. The days stretched on, each one a test of patience and resolve. Tiana found herself navigating a maze of meetings, interviews, and whispered conversations that circled her like a slow storm. Each exchange carried the undercurrent of doubt, but also the flicker of change. One afternoon, as she waited outside the courthouse, Malik joined her with 2 coffees in hand. He handed her one, their fingers brushing briefly, a small comfort amid uncertainty. "They're listening," Malik said quietly. "It's not perfect, but it's real." Tiana nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and hope. "I want to believe that, but I'm still fighting shadows." He smiled softly. "That's because you're brave enough to face them." She looked away, catching sight of a young girl watching her from across the street, curiosity shining in her eyes. For a moment, Tiana saw herself reflected, a future unwritten but full of possibility. Taking a deep breath, she turned back to Malik. "Then let's keep moving forward, no matter how slow." "Together," he agreed. As they walked toward the courthouse doors, the city around them hummed with life, indifferent, relentless, but full of stories waiting to be changed, and Tiana's was one of them. The courtroom was packed, tension thick enough to choke on. Every face held an unreadable expression, some judgmental, some curious, others plainly bored. Tiana sat at the defense table, hands folded, breathing shallow but steady. The weight of years, of assumptions, whispers, and outright prejudice, pressed against her skin like a suffocating cloak. She wasn't just fighting a sentence, she was fighting the invisible chains forged by color and circumstance. The judge entered, his presence commanding immediate silence. "We reconvene to review the case of Tiana Williams," he said, voice carrying authority yet shadowed with uncertainty. "After careful consideration, this court acknowledges that prior judgments may have been influenced by unconscious bias." A low murmur rose from the gallery. Tiana's lawyer nodded slightly, eyes locking with hers, a silent promise of steadfast support. The prosecutor shifted uneasily but said nothing. "New evidence will be reviewed and the sentencing reconsidered," the judge continued. "This court strives for true impartiality." Tiana's gaze never wavered. She spoke softly when addressed, her words measured and firm. "Your Honor, I ask not for mercy, but for justice. Justice that sees beyond skin and name." The judge nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his face. "So it shall be." As the proceedings drew to a close, the courtroom buzzed with a tentative hope. Tiana stood steady and calm. For the first time, the chains felt looser. Outside, Malik waited. Seeing her emerge, he offered a warm smile. Today was a step forward. She returned it, eyes shining with quiet fire. "And tomorrow, we keep walking." Together they stepped into the sunlight, unbroken, unbowed, ready for the long road. Ahead, the courtroom emptied slowly, voices hushed as people processed the subtle shift that had taken place. Tiana stood by the door, steady despite the whirlwind inside her. Every step forward felt fragile, yet each one was a testament to her strength. Malik approached, his presence a quiet anchor. You carried yourself well today. She met his eyes, a flicker of exhaustion softened by determination. It's not over. No, he agreed. But you've changed the game. They walked side by side down the marble steps, the sunlight spilling over them in golden streaks. The city buzzed beyond the courthouse, indifferent, relentless, but Tiana felt different now. She wasn't just a girl caught in the system. She was a voice demanding to be heard. Later, alone in her apartment, she stared out the window, at the skyline dotted with lights. Her phone chimed, a message from Malik. "Keep pushing, we're with you." She smiled faintly, fingers hovering over the screen before typing back, "Not just for me." The road was long, the battles many, but Tiana's quiet dignity, her unwavering calm, carved a space where justice could finally begin to breathe. And in that space, hope lived. The courthouse was quieter than usual that morning, the heavy air filled with a kind of expectant stillness. Tiana sat in the waiting room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The pale sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Her heart drummed low but steady, not with fear, but with the weight of everything that had led her here. Malik was beside her, his presence calm and grounding. He glanced at her and nodded slightly, a silent message. "You've come this far. Now keep going." The door to the courtroom opened and the bailiff called her name. Tiana rose, took a breath, and stepped inside. The judge was already seated, his eyes scanning a pile of papers before him. When he looked up, the courtroom felt like it held its breath. The judge's expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes told Tiana that this was no ordinary day. "Ms. Williams," the judge began, voice steady but carrying a hint of something deeper. "This court has reviewed the case with fresh eyes and an open mind. It is clear that earlier proceedings were compromised by factors outside the merits of the evidence." A murmur rippled quietly among the spectators, a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. The prosecutor shifted uneasily, but said nothing. Tiana's lawyer stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, we are grateful for the court's willingness to examine this case anew. We trust that justice will be served impartially." The judge nodded. "Indeed, the previous sentence is hereby vacated, pending a full and unbiased review of the evidence." For a moment, silence settled, heavy, but filled with the possibility of change. Tiana's voice was calm as she spoke next, steady and clear. "Thank you, Your Honor. I stand here not seeking leniency but fairness, not special treatment, but the impartial justice every person deserves." The judge met her gaze. There was respect there now, tempered by the weight of his own reflections. This court recognizes the importance of upholding justice free from prejudice, he said. "Let this serve as a reminder that the law must strive to be blind, not only to identity, but to the biases that threaten fairness." Tiana felt a swell of relief mixed with exhaustion. The battle was far from over, but this was a crucial step. As the judge adjourned the hearing, the courtroom began to empty. Tiana remained standing for a moment, letting the gravity of the moment settle. Malik approached with a quiet smile. "You did it." She shook her head gently, eyes steady. "We did it, but the real work begins now." Outside, the sun was higher, spilling golden light onto the courthouse steps. Tiana and Malik descended together, the noise of the city greeting them, indifferent and yet full of possibility. She paused and looked back at the courthouse, its imposing facade a symbol of the system she had challenged. Inside those walls, she had faced more than a sentence. She had faced the weight of assumptions, the burden of history, the silence forced upon her. But she had spoken. Her voice had not been loud or angry. It had been quiet and firm, a steady flame burning through the shadows of injustice. As she turned toward the bustling streets, Malik's voice was soft beside her. "You're stronger than you know." Tiana smiled, a mix of weariness and hope. I had no choice but to be. The city moved around them. People rushing, lives unfolding, stories intersecting and diverging. And in the midst of it all, Tiana's story had carved a space where justice was no longer just a word, but a living promise, where dignity was not surrendered, but fiercely held, where silence was broken, not with noise, but with the quiet power of truth. The road ahead would be long. There would be days of struggle, moments of doubt, but for the first time, Tiana walked it with a voice truly her own, unshaken, unbroken, and unstoppable. The air in the courthouse had a different weight now, lighter, yet charged with the remnants of what had transpired. Tiana stepped out onto the sunlit steps, the noise of the city folding around her like a familiar cloak. Malik was beside her, steady and unwavering, their footsteps falling in rhythm. She looked up at the sky, blue streaked with the soft gold of late morning light. The fight inside those walls had been exhausting, raw and unlike anything she'd ever faced. But it was a battle she couldn't afford to lose, not just for herself, but for everyone whose stories went unheard, whose faces were blurred by prejudice. Malik glanced at her. You changed the course of this case. That takes courage most. Don't find... Tiana met his gaze, her own calm but resolute. It wasn't just me. It was every quiet moment of strength I carried, every truth I refused to hide. A soft breeze stirred, ruffling papers in her bag. The world around them continued, oblivious yet full of possibility. Where do we go from here? Malik asked. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Forward, step by step. Not with loud proclamations, but with persistence, with dignity. They walked together toward the street, the city's pulse beneath their feet, the future uncertain, but no longer paralyzing. For Tiana, justice was no longer an abstract ideal. It was a path she was forging with quiet strength, a path where silence gave way to voice, and where every small victory echoed louder than the last. And that was enough. The city outside buzzed with life, cars honking, footsteps clicking. On pavement, voices weaving stories into the afternoon air. Tiana and Malik moved through the crowd, two figures among millions, yet marked by a quiet intensity that set them apart. I never imagined standing here like this, Tiana said softly, her eyes scanning the busy street. Malik smiled. Sometimes the hardest journeys begin with a single step. You took that step today. She nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle deep within. Years of silence, years of being boxed in by assumptions, had led to this moment. Not a grand victory, but a crucial turning point. We've opened a door, she said. Now we have to walk through it no matter what waits on the other side. Malik's gaze was steady. And you won't walk alone. A pause stretched between them, not empty, but filled with unspoken understanding. As they reached a crosswalk, the light changed. They stepped forward together, moving into the flow of the crowd, two voices rising in quiet harmony against the noise of the world. For Tiana, the fight was far from over. But now she carried a strength no judgment could silence, a strength born not of shouting, but of standing firm. And in that there was hope. The courthouse steps behind them, Tiana and Malik paused as the city stretched out before them. A maze of streets and stories, challenges and chances. The sunlight warmed her face, but the weight of what lay ahead was still real. Yet in her chest something had shifted. A quiet fire that no judgment could dim. She glanced at Malik. This isn't the end. No, he said firmly. It's just the beginning. Together they walked forward, unshaken, unbroken. In the silence between their steps, justice had found its first breath, and Tiana's voice was finally free to be heard.